Okay. And in which war did you serve during?
I served during the early stages of Vietnam.
And what was your branch of service?
The U.S. Navy.
And your highest rank when you got out?
Was third class Ingerman. Third class petty officer, Ingerman.
And can you just give us a brief synopsis of your military service? What different places you were from beginning to end, and then we'll get into your basic training.
Sure, thanks. Of course, yeah, we have basic training, and then right after basic training, I went to Class A Ingerman School. Upon leaving school, I was the only one in my group to have the wonderful assignment of Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, which was great. Everyone was jealous until they found out, some months later that the whole ship was sent to Vietnam. And it was in 1963 at that point, and they had just talked about the advisors in Vietnam and that they were actually more like soldiers. And they sent us over there as support. I then served the rest of my time until 1966 in Vietnam aboard the ship, which was stationed at that point at Subic Bay, Philippines. Right? And
all right. So
that's the brief.
Tell me, Jerry, were you drafted or did you enlist?
I enlisted after high school. I went to AI Prince Tech, and I went for electrical, and went in thinking I was going to be an electrician mate, perhaps on a submarine. Unfortunately, being colorblind and not being able to pass one of the colorblindness tests, I had to make a new choice. So I became an engineman, and I worked on the distilling plant aboard the ship. But it was that's basically how I got into the Navy. I enlisted. It was my pleasure to enlist at the time. I was looking forward to being part of the Navy, being part of the military, and seeing the world, and just being part of our country.
So, how was your family and so on with you enlisting? Was it
Not too bad, surprisingly. A lot of I am Jewish, and a lot of Jewish families had feelings about their son going into service for many reasons, mostly religious. But my parents were, if they knew, once they knew that's what I really wanted to do. My mother was devastated losing her baby, but they were also very accepting of it and supportive of me being in the service.
And you were single at the time?
Oh yeah, I was just it was 1 week after, just about 1 week after I got out of high school, and I was 18 years old.
Okay, so you went to basic training. Do you remember the day you left? What that experience was like? What was going through your mind the day you left home? And
tell you the truth, I do remember. I remember going, but what I remember was mostly anticipation and excitement, and the first time I really been away on my own. And I took the train to Great Lakes, Illinois, and it was a interesting train ride because at that time they did treat us like royalty, civilians. And once they found out that I was going into the service, they were really so nice to us, the few of us that were going on the train ride. And then I remember arriving in Great Lakes and being devastated because as soon as you get off the bus that took you to the lineup before you go into the barracks, they start yelling at you right away. And they make sure that you know that you have now lost control and they have now taken the control. And that's your first experience as in boot camp.
Were you not expecting that? Were you surprised by that, or?
I was not expecting that. It's very devastating. I can tell you the exact word that they used, which continued during most of boot camp, and that was maggot. They called us maggots. They didn't call us recruits or anything else. Maggot, get in line. Maggot, this and that. But especially the first half of it in boot camp was all double timing, running from place to place. You were not allowed to walk. Wake up 4:30 in the morning and do calisthenics or drilling, and then go to breakfast and stand in line for breakfast, and always take all you want but eat all you take, and then back to more drilling and inspections. And if you didn't pass your inspections, you went back to the barracks and scrub your clothes. And you had to, that's what life was like. It was like all about double timing it, and it teaches you to help each other, because you all become dependent on each other. You're either going to pass or fail, sink or swim, but you got to do it as a unit, and that's you appreciate it afterwards. That's what they're doing, is they get us to work together.
Can you tell us why did you pick the Navy as opposed to the Army or the Air Force or the Marines?
I had a couple of reasons. I had an uncle. Well, actually, I thought he was in the Navy at the time, but it turns out he was in the Merchant Marines, and that was one reason. The other reason, I always was afraid of my feet getting soaking wet and having rash outbreaks, because I just didn't want to do that. I at that time I would not go on the Ferris wheel, so I didn't want to be in the Air Force. And that pretty much, and I always loved the water, I always loved the sea, and I still love the sea. I can tell you a little story. When I went aboard the ship in Pearl Harbor, she was in dry dock. Then the first sea trial, I was out still down in the bilges working on the engine, putting the engines together. And we're out there, and I hear a lot of whistles and beeps and more whistles. And I turned around to the fellow next to me, and I said, when are we going to be leaving? He said, are you kidding? We've been out to sea for an hour. And he said, why don't you go topside? So I did. I climbed up the ladder. I went to the rail, and the water was breaking over the bow of the ship and just kind of like splashing along the side. I just fell in love with it. It's the mist in the air, the water. It's hypnotic. It's just so peaceful and beautiful, and just the raw energy of the ship, breaking through the waves, and just doing that. I never got seasick. At a time after that, we were up in the Aleutian Islands on Dew Line Picket Patrol, which is a line between Russia and America that you just troll back and forth on, and it's because we had radar on that ship. And it was very rough water. One time it tore a front gun, ripped it right off the ship. Another time we came back and the bow of the ship, the seam of the ship was ripped, so kind of like the ship being split in two, sort of. But we went back to Pearl Harbor, we limped back, and they welded us up, they fixed us up, and off we went again. But never was I really fearsome, or I never got seasick the whole time. I love the life.
Wow. Okay, Jerry, so were there any other stories you have from your basic training before we move from your basic training? In particular?
Well, I can tell you one thing. I remember very, very specifically. Every Friday night, they have to let us go to services of your religious choice. So every Friday night, I would leave the barracks and go to a stop where they'd pick us up to go to Jewish services. Well, all of a sudden, I think there was a lot more Jewish people than there ever really was there. They somehow found their way to the stop, and they would go, and we'd go to services, and then after services they always have a little shot of wine that they do a toast with, and some real food rather than military food. So everyone liked to go there, and it was a good experience to go services. So,
after your basic training, did you go to schooling?
After basic, I went to school, Class A Engineman School, and I really wasn't, and I'm now not a gearhead, as they say. I really never. I love cars, but I never really worked on the engines. The only reason I became an engineman is because engineman was the next letter over from electrician, which is, if you remember what I wanted to be, was electrician mate. So the next thing over was engineman. So that's how I got to be an engineman. But I worked on the engines aboard the ship, but my real love was the evaporators, which made fresh water. And once they put me in charge of it, we kept the fresh water continuously flowing. So we never had problems with not having our tanks filled with decent fresh water. We always kept them, because if you don't run them right, you have to dump the water, you have to break down the machinery, and then the sailors aboard ship are not particularly inclined to take in saltwater showers, so you're not the most popular person on the ship. As long as you keep that fresh water going, you're okay. It was good.
Where was your training?
In Great Lakes. At Great Lakes, yeah, they have at the time they had a full base there with different schools in it. I had to wait some months, and they put you into transit barracks, and I worked at the Great Lakes post office, military post office, and I worked there for months, and then I went into the Class A school, and it's right there on the barracks. I mean, in the area.
And that's where your basic was also?
That's where the basic was, yeah. There's two sides of basic. One was Moffett. I forget what the other side was, but it was well, I can tell you one other story too in basic. Again, with the height thing. They went through the obstacle course, and I didn't mind it at all. And then until we got up to this one area, we had to climb up a ladder and stand on a top of a area, and then you had to cross head over foot on a rope over some muddy water down probably a good 20 feet below you. Well, I hesitated, maybe 2-3 seconds, and you can't hesitate. So the person behind me shoved me off the ramp, and I went 20 feet into the mud.
Oh.
So I had to go back to the barracks, scrub my uniform, scrub my shoes, clean everything up, and then the next day I had to go through the whole thing all over again, and I did not hesitate. That was an experience.
You were fast, that.
You learn, yes, you become a fast learner. I was a good swimmer, so that at least one thing, you had to make it around the Olympic-sized swimming pool without drowning, and that was many of the people were from the Midwest, so they did not have a good time. So
part of basic training for them was learning how to swim.
Yeah, just enough to get around. That and taking your mask off in the gas chamber. That was everyone talks about that. That's another area that I didn't have any trouble with that, but many people did. And it's tough because you have to keep doing it until you get it right.
They had you do something after you take your mask off, say the alphabet or anything?
They had us, I'm trying to remember, they had us you took it off and you had to press a button or something, and then you put the mask back on and leave. But yeah, there was a certain time involved there that you had to survive it. I always figure I can get through anything if it's for a short time. I got through it.
All right, Jerry. So you finished up your basic, you finished up your job training.
Right.
Did you know when you left your job training that you would probably be working with the water?
Yeah, no, I did not. No. In fact, that's not part of the engineman training, except that we learn about valves and the different types of switching controls, that type of thing. Then when I went aboard ship, I was I was just starting off. I didn't have the rank. It took me a few years to get the rank, so I was the new guy on ship, and of course you have to do the equivalent of KP. They didn't call it that, but in my case, I worked in the kitchen. I think only for about a month or so, and I worked in the dishwashing area, washing dishes after it, and that was probably the easiest part of my service because you work hard during the meals, then you have nothing until the next meal. So in some ways, it was easy. And then I got into the engine room pretty quickly, and then we headed up to the Aleutian Islands. And part of the Aleutian Islands is the water is so rough that you're rolling and rocking, and it's very hard to do anything there. You eat your meals on rubber mats on the plates, not plates, but the square eating trays off of rubber mats, because otherwise you lose it. And the first watch I had was taking soundings, and back then we used to have plumb bobs that would go down the hole and take a sounding of the oil or the water, the fuel, whatever it was, and you had to wait till the ship was stable somewhat, and then touch the bob and then read it, and then put it in a book and go to the next one. And by the time you're done making the round, you had to start all over again. Exhausting, just very exhausting. And it was all part of the experience.
And this was all aboard which ship? Which boat?
The ship was the USS Vance, V as in Boyd, A-N-C-E, the destroyer escort radar picket patrol ship with the hull number 387, DER 387. It was a ship built. It was actually a Coast Guard cutter when it was first built, a big Coast Guard cutter, and then it was taken over by the Navy. But and it was a destroyer escort when it was first built. Went back into the shipyard, had more berthing compartments built on the sides, and had radar built up on the top and sonar on the bottom. So at that point, it was pretty top heavy. And we always joke that being top heavy, being up in the Aleutian Islands, if it ever rode too much, it would never come back up. But obviously it never did, so it was okay. And it was used again during Vietnam. And after Vietnam, it was brought and it was stripped down and used for target practice, and now sits in the bottom of the ocean and is a habitat for fish.
Really?
Yeah.
So, what was its purpose going to the Aleutian Islands? What was it?
Okay, up in the Aleutian Islands, at that time, this was during the Cold War, during the end of the Cold War. We were afraid of an invasion from the Russians, and they had radar on our land up in Alaska, but it didn't extend over the area of the Bering Sea, the North Bering Sea. So they needed a ship that would go up there and just cruise back and forth. Usually, you're going very slow engine speed, just going back and forth with the radar going. So if we were ever invaded, we'd be the first ones to know it. And we'd go up for a period of time, and then we would be relieved by another destroyer escort. And that was, in many ways, that was much worse, much harder than Vietnam. In Vietnam, as hot as it was, and it was very hot in our engine room, hot and steamy. But up in the Aleutian Islands, it was stormy. It was so stormy. It was scary. 'Cause, for example, we slept in watertight compartments, and when we had a storm up there, the first thing we had to do in the morning was get up and bail out the water out of our watertight compartment. That's because it just wouldn't hold it. The water would come in any place it could when you almost lay on your side.
And you never got sick after that?
I never got sick, ever. I mean, used to fall asleep, the racks, they call them, the bunks, are 3 high up to the ceiling, with maybe a couple feet between them. And up in the Aleutian Islands, you fall asleep holding on to the aluminum pole, that comes down on. So you kind of have to hold on so you don't fall off. But you do it. You get used to it. And when you have to go on watch, you have to, just jump out of your rack like a fireman, throw your clothes on, and, if you have like an emergency, you have to be ready to do that. And we had general quarters, emergency calls, some up there for reasons, and many in Vietnam. So you had to always be ready.
So, after the Aleutian Islands, what happened? And where were you stationed out of? You were stationed
Pearl Harbor.
You were stationed out of Pearl Harbor.
To go to the Aleutian Islands, yeah. And one of my biggest regrets, I do have one big regret in there, is I always wanted to go to the memorial, the Arizona Memorial, thank you. And it was right across the bay. We could see it from my ship. And we always thought we were going to get there. And when we were called to go to Vietnam, it was like right now. There was no chance to do anything. I forget if it was a matter of a day or two, but it was pretty fast. And we never got to go to the Arizona. But someday my wife and I will go back there. We'll get there.
Well worth the trip.
It is. I've heard it's a very emotional experience.
So you came down. Your ship came down on orders.
Yes.
To go to Vietnam.
Yep. Actually, if two friends and myself talked to an officer in Pearl Harbor maybe a week before that. We were asking him about volunteering for Vietnam because we had read about it in the newspapers at that point. It wasn't well known, but we read about it and we thought maybe we could get transfer to a ship and go there. And they said, no, if we need someone in your rate, we'll do the whole ship. So probably a week later or so, off we went.
The whole ship.
Yeah, the whole ship.
And when was this?
That was in 1963.
63.
Yes, sir. And I was there through 1966. I was there for over 2 years.
You were in Vietnam for 2 years?
Yeah, what they consider in the war zone because we were harbored in the Subic Bay, Philippines. That's all. Then we go out, we go in and go back to, except for a couple of hour trips. We went to Bangkok a few times, which is wonderful, and we did some hour, but mostly we just back and forth to Vietnam.
What was how was the trip going there, going to Vietnam and the Philippines from Hawaii?
Yeah, uneventful for the most part. It wasn't a bad trip at all, and I was actually going back. The last time we went back, I was discharged there, and I flew back from the Air Force Base in Manila, or not Manila, but in the Philippines, near Manila, and I went back from there, and that was wonderful. I was coming back. I had been extended for a couple of months, I think it was, involuntary extension, and then they got cut down, so I served, I think, like a month extra.
So 2 years between the Philippines and Vietnam. What was the ship's purpose?
What we did? Okay, we did. Now I have to get a couple of things here. We did have a couple of missions, and one of our main missions was search and seizure, which what we would do is we would intercept small boats and junks, Chinese junk type boats, and we demand that they stop, and we search the boats. We man them. We had a firing team. If they started to run, we'd fire a rifle over the bow. To my knowledge, not ever at them, over the bow. And if they did not stop, we would chase after them, and we'd chase as far as the water inlet to the to the rivers, and then either the Navy or the Coast Guard would take over and stop them up the river. But we're searching for contraband. The contraband could be anything from food to people, ammo, anything like that. But that was our main thing. We did a little bit of fire support, which means for our fellows fighting on, they call boots on now, on the land, we were designated certain quadrants to offer fire to help support them. And now I kind of like to mention a captain. We had 3 captains while I was aboard ship in Vietnam.
2 years you went through 3 captains.
Well, we had one that just was retiring, Captain Wright, wonderful, old-time, good Navy captain. And then in his place, Captain Marcus Aurelius Onheiter took over, and and he fits his name quite well in my opinion. But he was there for 99 days, and then he was physically removed. They came aboard the ship. I think he was notified, but he was dressed in his typical khaki Bermuda shorts and jacket and his pipe and so on. And they took him off the ship. They removed him from ship. And then we had another captain that took his place. But he took us into places that we weren't supposed to be. There's a book. This has been documented. There's a book, The Onheider Affair, by Neil Sheehan, that documents many of the things that he did, and we don't have enough time to even begin to go through all the bad things he did. But I can give you a couple of examples. Okay, one day we're cruising along, and there was some light just glinting off some rocks off of Vietnam, and he says, look up there, they're firing at us. And on the bridge where he was, they said, no sir, that's sunlight glinting off the rock. No, I know sunlight, he says, and something to that effect. And he says, we're going to fire back at them. And I think it was the XO, the officer of deck, said, I don't advise that, sir. He said, oh, I'm not captain, I say fire. So they started firing at these rocks, and when they were firing at these rocks with the glinter, the ammo would hit the rocks, and of course would also make sparks. And you see that? See that they're firing back at us. That proves it. So that was one thing that he did was, and that was humorous. Some of the things he did wasn't so humorous. He grounded our ship and put into for reverse. We had diesel engines that can't go from forward to reverse. It's like a car. You have to stop it, go into neutral, then go to reverse. Well, he ordered for reverse and blew an engine. When you're talking engine, I'm talking about an engine as big as a room, big engines. And so he blew the engine, and then he had us working on it for 3 days out at sea, which is also a no-no. It's supposed to go back in port with that kind of damage. So he did that, and another time he got in trouble because he ran across the bow of another ship, or if another ship that's firing on shore, and you go in front of them, that distorts their firing range, and it could be disastrous even for our own people. So that again was documented. But one of the biggest things that he did that kind of got the chaplains going, and then got the investigation going, was he instituted a morale service on the fantail, the back of the ship. And if you were not on active watch, you were mandated to be there. And it was more of a Protestant service type thing with the songs, the hymns he had to sing, and even the XO warned him that you can't do that. You have religious freedom.
And he was calling it a morale?
A morale, some kind of a morale. He had a name for it, but basically they would, and that got him in trouble. When the chaplains heard about that, the chaplain Dando came aboard ship, and he was taking testimony from different people about what went on, and that kind of got things going. But we also found out that there had been a ship trailing our ship, documenting where we went in uncharted water and what we were doing. So they were gathering evidence against him. They knew it at the time. So like I said, like a little more than 3 months, and he was history. And he had a officer's review, which is like a court-martial, and they froze him in his rank. Never to command another ship, and he lived out his life behind a desk, from what I understand. And he died a few years ago of Alzheimer's, or complications for Alzheimer's, still thinking that the ship was controlled by a bunch of rabble-rousers that were, he called it the Vance Mutiny, and he was convinced they were against him, that type of thing. I mean, he was so bad, and the officers' mess that they ate, They had to dress up for it. They got at the table, and there'd be in a place setting under one officer's place setting, a different officer each week. There'd be a note, and the note would have a subject, maybe how a gentleman treats a lady at an opera, for example, or the correct naval attirement for meeting someone important. It's something that has nothing to do with warfare. That has to do with manners and or history, and the person would have to get up and talk for a period of time, like 15 or 20 minutes, on the subject that they had no idea was coming their way. And that was one of the things that he did. He did a lot. And the only good thing is, for me, being in the engineering team, I was down below decks, and I stayed down there. And the captain went down there once in one of the engine rooms, not mine. He went down once for a matter of minutes when he took over the ship. He never came down another engine room. He didn't want to know. And most captains, they love their engineering people because we make them look good.
Wow. So was everybody aboard ship pretty much aware of that this was an unusual command?
Oh yeah, it was a very hard time in many ways. I mean, everyone knew. He had reveille, the sound reveille,
right?
The blasting early in the morning when people were just falling asleep from being on watch, and he blasted, so people jumped out of their racks, and everyone, and he sent out a newsletter all the time, talking about how great we're doing, how we're going to make news, and how the country's going to know what we did, and he just very egotistic, and he did that. He had a firing squad. He had one. It's another almost sad story. He had one gentleman. Just to tell you, his nickname was Mac. Well, Mac was great. Mac was a off the record scuba person, and he had all the gear. And one time we got fishnet tied up in our screws, and he undid it, which was great. And but the captain knew of his talents, so he used him for many things. He used him to do many things, and he had him all over the place. And poor Mac got to the point where he was taking medicine to stay awake and medicine to go to sleep, because he was always at the captain's beck and call, and it was driving him crazy. So one day the captain was up on the bridge, and Mac started reaching for his sidearm, and this other fellow, who was, I think he was a sergeant of arms, he saw Mac, and he started reaching for his sidearm. And years later, at one of our ship's reunion, this fellow that was sergeant of arms said if Mac had taken his gun out, he would have shot him right there. And what happened with Mac is he was listening to the captain, and all of a sudden the captain said something so outrageous, which was his like to do, that Mac broke down and started laughing, in a crazy way, not a good way. And he just broke down and started laughing, and they ended up giving Mac professional help, getting him off the ship. But that's the kind of captain he was. So that was our experience. Another thing that the captain did was he confiscated our crew's recreation money, and he bought a speedboat, a fast motorized speedboat. And he did use it for the crew a couple of times. We had picnics on a beach-friendly island, and that's okay by Navy regs. You can actually carry beer, some alcohol aboard ship. You're just not allowed to drink it aboard ship in the U.S. Navy. So he had a little picnic there. So he used it a couple of times, but I think the main reason he wanted it, because what he would do is dress it up, look kind of like a Chinese junk, put some boxes on it, and go into shore without running lights, no lights to illuminate it. So one time he's has several members aboard shore doing this, and all of a sudden a big light beacon shone down on the little boat, and they were about to get shot out of the water. It was our Coast Guard, and they were waving their hands saying, "We're American, we're U.S. Navy, we're sailors," and they weren't shot at, but it was that kind of. Another time he told it behind the ship. I think it was with the idea of like carrying on a line and then getting to a certain place and letting go or something. But they said that it was just crazy. They do it was everything they could do to keep from falling out of the boat. They were holding on for dear life because they were moving along fast for a speedboat. That's another time he did that with that. But he's just a fellow that should have never made it to captain. To command a ship like that, and a lot had to do with who you know, that type of experience.
Well, under your normal commanders, what was your daily life like? I mean, what was your routine for you?
Well, there's no doubt it was busy, but it was good busy. Your time to work in your workstation is from 0800 to 1600, and then you're off, except you're also standing watch. So in between being off and sleep time, you have your watch. So depending what watch you happen to be serving, it might cut into your work time, and if it's like during the day, you go down and sit around wherever your watch station is. Mine was on the evaporators, of course. Otherwise, you have some free time. The Navy is very fortunate. We always had excellent food. We had fresh food 95% of the time. If times we ran out of food, they hit the storage, and they had something we called mystery meat. It was green casing meat that looked kind of like hamburger, and they had that. And once in a while, they'd have SOS, which most people detested. But other times we had really good food, and on Sunday mornings they let the cook sleep in, so you could go into the kitchen and make your own eggs, whatever you wanted. So that was nice. And then many times in Vietnam, they had a tank that they split down the middle, put a grill over, so we'd actually have grilled steaks. Not bad food. And we always had what we call flicks. We had movies, and they were either on the fantail if we could, or in the dining area. Otherwise, and it was films. The old films, the big films. Then they just got transferred continuously from one ship to another. So many times you'd see the same ones over, but it was something to do. Or you shine your shoes if you wanted, or you study for whatever rank you want to go up to next, that type of thing. But I didn't find it boring. I really did, because there was always there was one good old boy from Louisiana that would come down and either play an instrument and sing a little bit, or he'd tell a story. And when he came to a ship's reunion some years later, he said, Jerry, I always loved to come down and sit next to you because you always listened to me regardless how long my story was. I said, we called him Braz. I said, Braz, I just love to listen to your voice. It was just so calming.
During your service, Jerry, did you receive any medals or citations?
I received the normal citations that you get for being in a battle area like that. Being aboard ship, I was never hurt, and we were fired at minimally. We would fire that, but not nothing big. But I got the Vietnam Service Medal and a few other medals. And plus, of course, the Good Conduct Medal, and 6 or 7 different medals, but nothing huge. I owe a big debt to my comrades that really put their life on the line. I have I belong to many organizations, and I'm now the national commander of the Jewish War Veterans, but I'm also very active in the Vietnam Veterans, the MVets, VFW, American Legion. I'm also part of a color guard at funerals too. So I keep busy, and it's for our warriors right now that over there and because there's no conscript, they have to go back and get deployed so many times, and we need to support them. And also our greatest generation, our World War II veterans who are disappearing daily. We owe them a debt of gratitude, and the other forgotten war, Korean War. It was a cold, miserable, tough war for so many of our Korean vets. We owe them all a debt of gratitude.
Definitely. So you left the Philippines on a plane as
Yes.
your EPS out of the service.
Yes.
So
Yep.
tell me what that was like when you got home. You hadn't been home for how long? At least 2 years. Did you go home before you went to Vietnam?
I went home. I went on leave. I don't think I went home once I got aboard the ship, I don't think I ever did go home. I went home right before that, and then in fact, at one point, my sister had my sister had a child that she had twins that didn't make it, and I couldn't get leave because we were in the middle of a patrol, and I could have put in for a hardship leave, but by the time I got back home, it would have been late, and it would have been nothing I could really do much about. So I didn't take leave at that point. That's always hard. Back then, we didn't have the communications that's available now. We didn't have, even to make a phone call, probably took a half an hour to get through on the payphone with all your car phone, your phone card that you had to use, and to get through was very tough. We got all our mail at once because we would get them from another ship, which passed the mail to us. So it was a lot different. The communications weren't there that there are now, which is good and bad. It's good and bad to both of them.
Yeah. I agree. So what was your home? Getting back.
My home greeting. Well, it wasn't great. As everyone knows, Vietnam veterans were not well received, but I guess for a while I didn't even realize how bad it was. I went to work for a little while at the Institute of Living, which is a mental hospital in Hartford. I went there as an aide just to kind of get my bearings while I was going to community college, and just to get to feel better about myself. And then that's where I met my wife, who's a nurse who's going through nursing training, her rotation at the Institute. And we met and fell in love. So I all my thoughts of going back in the service, because you can stay out for less than 90 days, you can go back in and not lose any weight. I was thinking about it, but at that point, my life kind of changed. And one time, after my wife and I had been married a year or two, I guess it was, we were marching right here in New Britain, Connecticut, and we were coming down right across the street from where the Roly Poly Bakery is now. Is that East Main Street? No, it's I'm not sure either, but that street, it comes around the curve and comes into Main Street in New Britain. We were pelted with rocks. We were marching. This was with the VFW. I was the only Vietnam veteran actually in the group at that time. I was in their color guard. But because we were military, and because of what the feelings were of the public, we had rocks thrown at us. And that's how we were treated. I was never spit at, but we were told that at certain points not to wear our uniform in public too. which is just the opposite of what happens now. And no one rushed up and thanked us or anything like. No one. I wear my hat now, and I go places, and people say thank you for your service, and I shake their hands, and it's a good feeling. I don't wear that because I want to generate publicity for myself, but I want people to realize there are people in the military, and to have an outlet to thank. Yep.
Did you make any strong friendships while you were in the military?
Oh yeah.
Are you still in contact with?
Mm-hmm. Like I said, when I left the ship, it was kind of in a hurry, very much of a hurry, because I had been extended, and then the extension got dropped. I had gone back to the ship, and I was sleeping in on, I think it was a Sunday morning, and the person who had the watch woke me up and said, "Why are you still sleeping?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, you have to get off the ship now, or you'll be back on patrol for another patrol." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, your extension got dropped down, and you can leave." I said, "Well, no one told me." So I had to pack up 2 sea bags, one with my Navy clothes and one with my civvies, my civilian type clothes. I got off the ship carrying 2 heavy bags off the ship. And I went to Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines. And I never got a chance to say goodbye to really much of anyone. So then some years later, I'm sitting at home at the computer. These were in the days of the early computer, pretty much. And I decided to type in the USS Vance, see what I could find out about it. I didn't know I had search engines or anything else about that. So I typed in the Vance, and all of a sudden a web page came up. And they had been meeting for a few years already.
Really?
So, and the first ship's reunion we went to was in West Virginia. It was at Virginia Beach. That's what it was, Virginia Beach. And so we get close to Virginia Beach, and I'm very nervous about meeting my friends. I've lost a lot of my hair since then, gained a few pounds. I'm a little nervous. So we walked into this big room, and this fellow who was an oil king aboard ship, a good friend of mine, turned around, and I think I can say this. He looked at me, and this is from the other side of the room. He said, "Jesus Christ, it's Jerry Blum." And it just made me feel so welcome. And we hugged and cried. And then I got to meet some other friends, and another redneck friend of mine, well, I should say a redneck friend, this other guy wasn't, said to Joanne, my wife, he says, "When Jerry left the ship, it nearly broke my heart. I'd like to die." So we've been going to the ship's reunion ever since we went the first time. I was the officer in charge for a couple of years, and we're going again this year. We're going to Tennessee this year. Last year, when I was the officer in charge, we went to Plymouth, Mass, and we went to the Battleship Cove, and we had a great time. It's just because we're dying off too. We lost a Chief Wakefield, a wonderful guy. We lost him, and the guy that first greeted me, he died of cancer, and a lot of it has to do with the Agent Orange. I'm a victim of Agent Orange myself too, but and I'm fighting for the whitewater sailors that are not getting presumptive treatment from Agent Orange. I just recently testified in front of the Congress, in front of the Joint House Committee, Veterans Affairs, and I always say white, blue water. I always picture the white water. It's blue water Navy. I'm sorry, because you have the two blue water is the ones that the ships basically stay out at sea, and the brown water are the small boats that go up the rivers. Okay. So I fight for the blue water Agent Orange Corps.
They need it.
They do. They deserve it. I have a friend, actually, if I may say this, that's in the VVA right now that was on a ship, and he should be 100% disabled because of Agent Orange. he's got all the diseases he got should be presumptive under Agent Orange. At least almost everything he has, starting with diabetes. And because his ship did not keep the right logs, that the ship was excluded from the list. Now my ship went into a harbor once that's on the list, so we're included in that list. We were, I know we got, I feel that we got some Agent Orange out at sea too, but they know for a fact that when we went into that area, we were subject to it. But that it should be presumptive, because when you sign that line, when you agree to join the service and fight for your country, the country signs a line too. They're saying we'll agree to take care of you. They need to.
How has your experiences in the military, in the Navy, how has that impacted your life since then?
Since then, probably not as much as it should have at the beginning. It did to some degree, but busy raising a family and doing what I did, and I joined the different groups, and I did what I could as I was raising the kids. Then when I got a little bit older, I got more and more involved with the especially with the Jewish war veterans and all the different groups. All of them do a great job. They all help. Donations that people give go right for veterans. That so many of these groups that you hear about, a huge amount goes to, even though they're nonprofit, the people that run it receive too much in salary, and people should know that if they're going to give money, they should give it something where the majority, with a good majority, goes right to the needy person. And that's what I like about the different, the VFW, American Legion, AMBET, Jewish War Veteran. Anything that we do for the veteran. And obviously, since then, I've become involved up to my neck in Veterans Affairs. And my wife feels the same way. And, she used to wonder when we were first married why I talked about my experience so much. To her, I didn't talk about it to a lot of people, but to her, back then I talked a lot. And then when we started going to the ship's reunion, she said to me one day, she says, "Now I know why you live in that moment, in effect, because it just affects your life so much. It means a lot. The friendships you make are the best friendships that you ever have. You're living with people 24/7." And it's a very important thing. And I honestly, give a plug for the country, I'd like to go back to the conscript military, because back when everyone you knew had someone in their family or someone very close to them who was military, and back at a certain point, the government, if you wanted to run for office, you had to be in the military. I mean, it was just dominant, and now it's not so much. But at least now people do appreciate the military, so that's a positive.
Well, Jerry, is there anything else you'd like to say before we conclude?
Well, I'd like to thank CCSU for giving me this opportunity to speak. I'm really humbled because, I did serve. I would have been willing to go wherever they want me to go, do what I had to do. Even then, I had that mindset. I also realized, I think I was lucky that I was not on land, because all we would hear about is the horror stories about what was going on in Vietnam. And I'm just very grateful to my brothers and sisters that gave their all. And like the old saying, we all gave some, but some gave all. It's very, very true. I mean, the people that died, the people that are at the Vietnam Wall, people in the Korean monuments in Washington, D.C. that died, the people in World War II, these are all people that didn't do it for laughs. They gave what they did for their country.
All right, Jerry. Well, I want to thank you for your service. I want to thank you for giving us your time today to do this little talk.
It was my pleasure.